Awesome. Okay, good morning. Thank you so much for coming in today. You know, as a mental health practitioner, just seeing how many people are either interested in this topic, passionate about it, or are looking for resources in it is just really inspiring and really encouraging to me, just in looking at the past couple of years, just with COVID-19, everything that's been happening, just how much of a mental health crisis this country is in. Seeing so many people who are willing to do the work today, not only financially, but with your time, with your energy, is so inspiring. So like Randy said, my name is Baumhardt, and I actually just want to take a second to thank Randy for his vulnerability, and just being willing to talk about his mental health journey. And it actually ties in a lot to what I'm going to be talking about today, which is going to be talking about navigating the mental health system. In Randy's story, he actually talked quite a bit about what his journey was like in navigating that system. And he even talks about, how long it took to get there. And so what I'm hoping to address in this presentation is kind of shortening that time for you guys a little bit, or shortening that time for somebody that you love or around you who needs that help as well. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So who am I, and why is this important to me? So as I said earlier, my name is Baumhardt. I got my master's in social work at the University of Cincinnati this past April, and I've been a licensed social worker for about a year. The last time I spoke at one of these events, I was not employed, but this time I am an assessment specialist at Beckett Springs Behavioral Health Hospital. I work with both inpatient and outpatient admissions, so I see diagnoses ranging from depression and anxiety, so I also work with severe psychosis and suicidal ideation with the intent to act on those feelings. So I see a very wide variety of both mental health needs as well as chemical dependency needs. I work with a lot of detox. So this area is very important to me, because not only do I work in it, I am a part of the mental health system. I am a part of one of the higher acuity levels of the system. But this area is actually very important to me because I have spent about the last 10 years of my life navigating through the system as well. I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder as a kid. We had a tornado blow through in second grade, and I would wake up my parents every night, every time there was a breeze, and I would tell them a tornado was coming, and so they knew that's not right. So I ended up getting diagnosed at a pretty early age. I made my way through life trying to figure out medications. I was also working with ADHD, so I was going through medication management there as well, so there was a lot going on in that area. My first time in therapy was in middle school. I met with a CBT therapist at Children's Hospital, and that actually was very helpful. She helped me work through a lot of kind of worst case scenario training, and there's actually some things that she taught me even way back then that I still carry with me today. My mental health journey changed a lot when I started college. My depression was out of control my freshman year. I went through some pretty severe episodes with depersonalization, derealization. I was wandering around campus at night kind of trying to figure out where I was. That's how bad it got. I ended up transferring home because of that and going to UC. And during that summer, I started meeting with a nurse practitioner at a mental health agency called PsychBC to do some medication management there. I was not seeing a therapist yet at that time, but I did see a therapist when I was at school, so that was my second round in therapy. It was with a grad student. And that helped a little bit, but I still, at that time, didn't really know how to talk about what I was really feeling, because I didn't understand what was going on. So I went through medication management there. Things were going okay until around my senior year. Things started getting a little wonky with COVID, and then grad school happened, and my entire grad school career was supposed to be in person. It ended up being online. I was on a specific medication for my depression at the time, and when I upped it, it actually ended up doing the opposite of what it was intended to do. And so within the span of 2 weeks, I had a very detailed and very specific plan on how I would take my life. And so I ended up, at that point I was seeing a new therapist. I'd been seeing her for about 8 months at this point. I had to call a hotline at one point to get some advice because I was very close to doing something that I never thought in my life I would ever do. And I ended up speaking with her about what was going on, and we had to form a safety plan. I moved home, was still able to do school, but I was under very close supervision with my family. And at that time I went and saw a psychiatrist and started doing medication management there. So I've been through about 8 or 9 different medication changes within the last year. we're good now. We've got it settled. But the mental health system is something that I have been navigating for a long time, and it's something that I know I will be continuing to navigate probably for the rest of my life, and that's just the reality for a lot of us. And so what I'm hoping to do is not discourage you with that story, because I am doing so much better now. Like, it just takes time, it takes work, but I'm hoping that we understand that, especially for those of us who don't deal with this or have family members that do that, this isn't item that takes work. It takes time to kind of sort this thing out, hash it out, and get to where we need to be. So that's why this area is really important to me, and it's also just really important to me as a mental health practitioner, because I see such a wide variety of people come through. Some people that I see are either homeless or very low poverty or just going through very extreme situations, and some people you would just never guess. It's just a very interesting thing, the way our mental health impacts us as a community. No one is really above or safe from mental health challenges, and that's something we need to address as a community. But I guess I wanted to start off with some questions because I am the first speaker, so I wanted to help you guys wake up a little bit and answer some questions for me. But why would it be appropriate, why would it be appropriate to either seek a therapist or seek professional help? So anybody, if you want to raise your hand or just let me know, when do you think it would be appropriate to do that? Sabrina?
When it interferes with your daily living.
Okay, that is a great answer. Anybody else?
When you need to get help, like if you're going to do something bad, or just like you're just overwhelmed and you need help or advice or something.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, help or advice. I think that's a great point. Asha?
Going through life changes?
Mm-hmm. Going through life changes, absolutely. Anything adjustment related. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. When somebody else feels like it would be helpful for you. Sure. Anybody else? All right.
I think when you have something going on in your life and you don't necessarily know what it is or how to fix it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I can agree and relate to that, because when my freshman year of college I was going through things, I had no idea what was going on, and mental health was really, really important then. On the other flip side of that, something that I think is really important to address is, as much as I can harp on how good therapy is, there are barriers to getting mental health treatment. But what would you say, personally for you or just in your community, what would you say are some of the barriers to pursuing mental health assistance, either emotional or practical?
Cultural implications of what mental health is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, like some cultures may not discuss it, it may be something we don't discuss, so absolutely.
I think it can be really difficult to find the right therapist, and it can be really hard to go to someone, tell them your story, realize it's not a good fit, then have to find someone else and tell them your story again, and you're making progress, but you're not making progress because you're still trying to find that right fit for your needs.
No, that's a great point. Bobby?
I think because of the fear and stigma of mental health in our society, you can actually be declared mentally unfit for your job. And so that goes on the permanent record, and I think a lot of people can be fearful of that because even though there is laws being implemented and trying to get out into legislation to protect mental health rights, it hasn't necessarily been fully protected yet.
Mm-hmm. Marina?
Just the physical energy that it takes to even start the process. Yeah. And then another barrier for a lot of people is finances.
Yes. Yeah. That's huge. That is huge.
I call it the trifecta. Bethany kind of touched on it, but you have to have insurance, and you have to find who takes your insurance. Yeah. You have to find somebody you gel with, and somebody who's available when you're available. So if you can find those three things.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think just getting past the stigma that people have toward people that have mental issues. There are some people that are not comfortable with that, and so they can start avoiding you. or, you know, don't know how to answer when you tell them what's going on. So I think a lot of people with mental issues just stay quiet about it.
Absolutely.
I think acknowledging or acknowledging or admitting that you have that that's an issue that you have an issue.
Yes, that one is huge. I deal with that a lot in my line of work. But those are awesome answers and very real. I would say those apply to just about everybody. I see that like all the time with my clients. I mean, I work for a private company, and so we are very insurance heavy on what we take, and so yeah, that is something that comes up a lot, unfortunately. So something that's interesting that I see in my line of work is, so I'm an assessment specialist, so what I do is I determine the level of care for the people that come through our doors. We have 3 programs at our facility. There's 1 inpatient and there's 2 that are outpatient. And a lot of times that what I see is people will come in after Googling us, because they see that we're a mental health facility. They will come in to do an assessment, and all they'll write down on their sheet of like why they're seeking assistance today is, I don't know where to start. They'll sit down in front of me and I'll say, you know, what brings you in to see us today? And they'll say, I don't really know what I need right now. I don't know where to start. I don't know, I just know I need something. And I Googled you guys, and this is the best I can do. And so, you know, sometimes I work with people in our programs and end up meeting their needs, and sometimes they don't. I have to point them in another direction. But a ton of people will come through our doors just saying, I don't really know where to begin with all of this. So I wanted to start by talking about what specific resources are kind of available, and I have them kind of divided into 2 sections. One of them is high acuity services, so higher severity services, and then lower acuity services, so those are lower severity services. So in our high acuity services, really the top one is acute inpatient. So that is stabilization, so that is part of what I do. So that's stabilization, either going through an incredibly severe manic episode that may include extreme paranoia or a decline of functioning, whether your mental health is getting in the way of your life that you literally cannot function. That includes suicidal ideation without an ability to plan for your safety or be able to confirm your safety. And that may also include detoxing from items like opiates or alcohol are the 2 main ones that we offer detox for, because detoxing from items like alcohol can actually be very dangerous for your health. So that is where we kind of start. Is what a lot of people don't get about acute inpatient is they think it's kind of like, some people will call it a vacation, some people, I don't know how many of you are on social media, but they'll call it like grippy socks camp or things like that. That's not typically the purpose. I don't want to deter anybody from pursuing that kind of help, but typically it's more based around the idea of stabilizing you to get back to kind of that baseline of where you need to be to function to move forward. The area kind of below that is a residential treatment, and that can be supportive daily treatment in a residential setting or facility. So that could even include rehab, that could include residential chemical dependency treatment, that can include residential mental health treatment, and that's kind of an area where it's just somebody supporting you in your day-to-day life. The next one below that is hotlines. Hotlines are near and dear to me because I have used one before. And they are also near and dear to me because I actually operate one. I operate at my job, the Butler County Crisis and Hope Line, where we actually send out crisis workers to situations where they would be needed to either help somebody get to the hospital, or if there's areas where they're in a crisis, we send them out for that. So those hotlines can be really helpful. They're either dispatch hotlines in that way, or kind of convincing somebody that they need to go to an ER to get an evaluation, or even warm lines where somebody can go and just kind of talk for a while and get some advice from a mental health professional. And then the last one under high acuity services are intensive outpatient programs. Those are both typically day programs. In my facility, we offer what's called partial hospitalization and intensive outpatient, and they are typically 2 weeks to a few weeks long. They're day programs, usually 5 to 6 days a week, and what you do throughout those programs is a variety of therapies every day, and then you're also meeting with a psychiatrist for medication management. And in those programs, what we call them is kind of like a hard reset. You are gaining all these skills, you're talking to other people who are going through similar situations, you're going home and practicing them, and then you're coming back the next day. So you're not staying the night at the facility, but you're kind of forming this balance between both your day-to-day life and intensive mental health treatment. So it can be a really helpful way to kind of integrate either back into your day-to-day life if you did inpatient, or it's a really great way to kind of do a hard reset to help build some really incredible skills there. So on our low acuity end, we have groups. So there's different kinds of groups. There are certain therapies that actually pair their modalities with groups. So that could be DBT. DBT usually pairs with groups. So DBT is a kind of therapy we'll actually talk about later that offers groups where you can go and kind of practice these skills with other people who are dealing with similar situations, talk about interpersonal needs, things like that. There's NAMI groups. NAMI is the National Alliance for Mental Illness, and they offer support groups. There's NA and AA, so Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous, and those are support groups for maintaining sobriety. There's Al-Anon, which is for individuals who are either spouses of people with chemical dependency issues, children, you name it. They have a lot of different groups for that kind of issue. And then there's just support groups in general, so that could be grief recovery groups, that could be support groups for people who have lost parents at a young age. There's a lot of different kinds of support groups for different areas where we might find some mental health challenges. Medication management is another one of those. That can be psychiatry, so that can be seeing a psychiatrist through a mental health agency, or that can be talking to your family physician or general practitioner about medications. Depending on what your needs are, you might see different levels of medication management depending on if you see a psychiatrist or a general physician. There are some medications that a general physician may be less likely to prescribe. And then below that is traditional mental health counseling. So that's kind of the one we all are kind of familiar with, which is either seeing a therapist or a counselor. You might see them weekly, you may see them bi-weekly, monthly, and it can be short-term or long-term depending on your needs. I think we all have this belief that once we get locked in with a therapist, it's like for life. They're like for lifers. Now, you can see a therapist, you know, if you're buying a house, you can see a counselor to talk through that process. If you are looking to change careers, you can see a counselor to talk through that process. That's actually a form of therapy called short-term, kind of short-term solution therapy, solution-focused therapy, and that is very goal-oriented and very short-term. So there's a variety of ways you can see a counselor without feeling like you're signing some sort of lifelong contract. So there's a lot of resources, a ton, which is great and something we're going to be needing, especially coming out of this pandemic. And so honestly, I could probably do a presentation on every single one, but we're just going to focus on therapy for today. So the first question we could answer is, who could be your therapist? It's not just some random Joe Schmo off the street that you're paying some weird copay to sit and just talk at. There's a lot of different people who are qualified to do this. The first one is a licensed clinical social worker, or in the state of Ohio, it's an LISW. So that's a social worker with an independent license. They have taken a clinical exam and they actually practice independently. There's a licensed marriage and family therapist. There's an NCC, National Certified Counselor, an LCDC, which is a licensed chemical dependency counselor. Social workers can also operate in that area. A licensed professional counselor is somebody who's gotten their master's degree in psychology and they practice counseling there. There's licensed mental health counselors. There are doctors of psychology, that could be seeing a psychologist. There is a doctor of philosophy, and there is also doctors of medicine. Some physicians actually practice CBT or some other short-term counseling with their clients as well. So what's important, and one of the ways to kind of meet that trifecta, as Asha was talking about earlier, is first looking at what kind of demographic needs you're looking for in a therapist. Because if you walk into a room and it's somebody who's totally different from you, that's not a bad thing. But if you're going to be getting really vulnerable with that person, there might be some similarities that you want to share between them. The first one may be age. Do you want somebody that is closer in age to you? Do you want somebody older than you that you might feel like is more of a mentor, or more somebody that can give you advice in that way? Do you want somebody that's younger than you? Who knows? That's an area to definitely look at as far as what you're comfortable with, where you're comfortable with receiving input, things like that. Race, ethnicity, and culture. It can feel really selfish to look for those kinds of things, but sometimes what we talk about a lot is cultural competency. And if you're constantly having to explain your cultural beliefs, background, even your experiences racially with somebody, that can be really exhausting. So it can actually be very important to seek out somebody who might share those experiences with you so that you're kind of already on that same page when you're explaining something, they kind of get it a little bit more. Religion is something that is really important. You might want to, because a lot of our mental health issues tie in with our personal beliefs, values, religious beliefs, values. So do you want somebody who shares those values as well? Do you want them to integrate that into their practice, or do you want somebody who is an outside third party to all of that? Do you want no involvement with that whatsoever, or kind of a mix between the two? So that's a really important area to look in. Do you want somebody who identifies as a Christian counselor or of a certain religion, or do you want somebody who's not into that at all? And then sexuality and gender orientation. That one is also very important because, again, with culture, there are certain unique experiences to that demographic that it can be exhausting to have to explain over and over again. And so if you want somebody who either A, shares that kind of identification with you, or B, has experience, training, or just info on that kind of, on your sexuality or on your gender orientation, would that be more helpful for you to feel comfortable with opening up to them? That can be really important because a lot of that ties into our mental health, is our identity and what we're comfortable with sharing in that area. And so that can be a very important area to kind of look into when you're looking for a therapist. So there are a lot of different kinds of therapy. There is music therapy, there is art therapy, there's equine therapy, there's behavioral therapy, all sorts. Pick your poison in a sense. But today we're going to focus on talk therapy. So just sitting down talking. I mean, as much fun as it would be probably to talk about equine therapy, I have no experience in that area. So we're going to focus on talk therapy. The first one I want to talk about is called psychodynamic therapy. Psychodynamic therapy is the stereotypical, you're laying on the chaise lounge, talking to the bald man with the goatee, I don't know. Sigmund Freud type therapist, which psychodynamic therapy was actually developed by Freud, so that's kind of why they're associated with each other. He's kind of the father of talk therapy, I don't know. But that is kind of how it's developed. So it is usually very unstructured. There's no agenda or curriculum with psychodynamic therapy. So what you're focusing on is you just walk in and you're kind of like, what, how's your week going? You're talking about your week and then you're like, you know, that also reminds me of a time when I was a kid and I did this and then my mom said this. And then you're like, oh yeah, but that also reminds me of a time in college when I was like taking this test and then my classmate did this, and you're like just bouncing all over the place. But what's the goal of that is to kind of find the behavioral patterns, the thought patterns within that kind of free association, all of kind of what you're explaining to your therapist. And so you're kind of identifying some of these, either some triggers you have, some of your patterns, either emotionally or behaviorally, like kind of where your thoughts are going, where your emotional tendencies are. And it's even kind of helping interpret, I mean, you can talk about dreams, you can talk about memories, you can talk about recurring fantasies, things like that. It's helping interpret those as well. And so we don't often get to sit down in front of somebody and just do that. I mean, there's not typically an opportunity for us to sit down and make all of those connections and jump between past and present and future. And so it's an amazing opportunity to really help interpret kind of our emotional psyche and our emotional well-being by getting to make the connections between that. It's typically viewed as a longer-term form of therapy because it takes a long time to identify what those patterns are. So that's one where it's more of a longer-term relationship because it can take a couple, like, months or years of talking to somebody to really identify kind of how those patterns work, or for them to gain a full understanding of who you really are in your experiences and in your kind of present state of mind. So another one that I talked about a little bit earlier is called DBT. DBT is actually the therapy I participate in as a client right now. I see a DBT therapist. It's kind of more talk therapy, more psychodynamic right now because I kind of blab about everything that's going on in my life. But when we have an agenda, we go through a curriculum and we go things like that. It was initially developed to actually work with borderline personality disorder, if you guys have heard of that. It has kind of some set tenets of building skills in interpersonal relationships, building life skills, distress tolerance, and building a relationship with suffering, and also practicing mindfulness. So those are some of the main tenets of DBT. So it's about strengthening kind of our ability to either self-soothe or to even form a partnership with suffering and with the idea of kind of working with inconvenience and suffering and kind of being able to move forward. So that one often has a curriculum that you're kind of working through from beginning to end. And then you're also, a lot of DBT practitioners also pair you with a group that you are meeting with and working on those skills as well. So one that is really important, especially just with our past and with things that we've dealt with, is called EMDR, Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. This one is built around processing trauma. Trauma is very complicated, and the longer we've kind of gotten into these last few years, the more research has been coming out about different types of trauma, complicated trauma, different traumas that we may not have listed as that, but actually are, and that are things that we kind of carry with us. And what's great is that later on Erica will be diving into trauma and talking about that a lot more, so I think that'll be really helpful. But this is a therapy that is designed to address that. We have traumatic memories kind of stored in our minds and bodies that often get stuck. It's very difficult for us to process them, and so this is a type of therapy that is designed to help us kind of get those unstuck and figure out a different way to process them. So it is designed to foster the natural adaptive and healing processes in our brains to reprocess stuck memories and stuck traumas. So it uses lights, rhythmic tapping, or other methods. I don't know if you guys have seen in movies or things like that. Somebody will pull out like the old-fashioned metronome and they'll kind of, have it going back and forth. That's kind of the stereotypical idea behind EMDR. It uses something called bilateral stimulation, which somehow helps your brain kind of reprocess your trauma in a different way, gets those emotions unstuck, things like that. It is a lot of work, and it can be unpleasant for sure, because it does ask that you recount those experiences. So it is something to kind of contemplate, am I ready to do this before going into it? But it is extremely helpful in reprocessing traumatic memories and kind of helping you move on from kind of the way those can really burden you and when you carry them with you. The last one that I wanted to talk about is cognitive behavioral therapy. This is the type of therapy I did when I was in middle school. And it's one of my favorites that I actually practiced when I was a behavioral health consultant with Trihealth. I love cognitive behavioral therapy because it's incredibly practical. It's very logical, it's very realistic, and it's also just very fascinating the way it works. So when we, as people, go through our lives and we go through situations, especially if we have underlying mental health conditions where we're more predisposed to be more depressive or more anxious, we condition ourselves to think in certain ways. So we actually end up forming these neurocognitive channels of, I see this stimuli and I react to it this way. I think these thoughts, I react to it this way. It's an actual cognitive reaction that we could become conditioned to, and our brains actually adapt to that because the brain is wild and loves doing that kind of thing. The point of CBT is to introduce different ways of thinking so that we actually form new neurocognitive pathways. So it's not only just emotional, but it's a biological way of treating our mental health. And so it's not only helping us form more positive pathways, it's not just about being more happy, it's not just about looking at life from rose-colored glasses, it's really about forming more realistic pathways. And so we often look at ourselves in unrealistic ways, we look at situations in unrealistic ways. And so the goal is not just to be blindly happy about things, it's about to look at things in a more realistic pattern. So this type of therapy can be practiced in a traditional mental health setting. It's also structured, it's very structured actually. There's an agenda, there's homework that's usually involved. There is kind of an agenda of kind of what's addressed throughout, what they're working on. There's a lot of kind of role playing and scenarios and kind of picking apart your thoughts in a logical way, in a way that helps you understand your emotions. And so the goal is to rewire different patterns of thinking in order to look at things more realistically. So with that, I wanted to do a CBT exercise with you guys real quick. So in your packets that I gave you, it'll be titled Therapy Cheat Sheet, but it's going to be the page with the boxes. And for some reason when I had these printed at FedEx, they kind of did it really weird. And so some of you might have two, some of you, all of you will have one, but some of you might have two, which means that you can practice this again later. So you're welcome. But you'll all have at least one. So it'll look like this, has the boxes with the arrows, all that good stuff. So I'll give you guys a second to find that. All right. I don't know if you guys have pens or anything. I hope you do. Okay, cool. It came in the bags. I remember saying that. Good. So what this is actually a branch of CBT called REBT, and that's Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy. All we're looking at is the way the consequences can run depending on how we think. So the first box is a negative event. So that negative event could literally be, I got an email from my boss saying, please meet me after you finish this report, or something like that. I don't know. Something very ominous, with a very ominous like signature of like best regards or something like that. You know, something that makes you feel really anxious because you don't know if they're gonna fire you or if they're gonna just tell you that you put a comma in the wrong place. I don't know. I don't work in an office. But you have that negative event, could be anything in that vein. The next box I want you to look at, fill in, think about is the negative or irrational thought that can go with that, which could be, oh man, they found out I am such a bad employee, or oh man, they figured out I have no qualifications for this, they finally got me, or I am incompetent, or you name it, just the negative, or oh my gosh, here he goes again, he's always on my tail, you name it, things like that. Any negative or irrational thought that can go with it, like that automatic thought you first think when you experience that kind of situation. So the next one I want you to consider after that is the negative emotion / behavioral consequence that goes with that. So let's say that you get that email, you start thinking about how terrible of a worker you are, everything that could be possibly going wrong, every bad thing that could be possibly happening, you're not going to be in a good headspace until that situation is resolved, which could even be the end of the day. So you could be in a terrible headspace at the end of the day, you're anxious, you may be experiencing physical symptoms, your hands may start shaking, you're sweating, everything is making you jump, you may snap at a coworker, you may punch the microwave when one of your frozen dinners is still uncooked in one corner, you name it. It could be a really bad day for you until that situation is resolved, and it's all because of that kind of thinking pattern that you've been using this whole time. So under that, I want you to think about a rational thought that you could be having, and that could be if you, okay, maybe he has something he needs to show me, maybe there's a new project. Even if it is something negative, that doesn't mean I'm a bad worker. It's not a reflection of who I am as a person. Different areas you can think about to make yourself not be like, oh man, I'm the best person ever. You know, I'm the best worker. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Things like that aren't necessarily helpful. It's more thinking about, you know, what's realistic in the situation? What is my thought saying and what's actually true? What's the actual evidence about what's going on? And what's the evidence against what's not going on? And so what are the positive, realistic, emotional behavioral consequences is say you get an email like that and you decide, you know what, I understand that I am scared about this email. I can't do anything about it right now. So I will address this later when it comes down to it. And so you kind of put it off until the time comes where it's actually important for you to address it. And so instead of kind of going through all the shakes and the irritation and the agitation, the sweats, everything, it's a little bit easier to stay calm. And I'm not saying that this is an automatic, easy thing to do. It takes practice. But that is one of the exercises that you will find in that kind of modality of therapy, and there's a lot that you can do in there as well. So some good questions to ask your therapist the first time you see them, if you see one, is how would you describe your approach? Are you hands-on, hands-off? Do you give advice, or are you just there to listen? What kind of experience do you have with my culture, race, sexuality? That kind of goes back with the demographic questions. Have you been to therapy yourself? Is that something you have experience in? What's your experience in the mental health world? Some therapists are not comfortable with self-disclosure, and that's okay. That's a boundary, but that is a question that you can ask. How do you set up goals? What does it look like in your practice for me to be meeting the goals that you set? What would it look like for me to be meeting the goals that we've made? What happens after I meet them? What goes forward from there? So kind of even looking ahead of what could happen if things go well. What's a typical session like? Do you have an agenda? Does it have a structure? Is there going to be homework? How do we structure our sessions, or is it just us talking? And then what kind of therapy do you practice? Is it one of those modalities, or do you do something different? Do you have a mix of things? What kind of therapy is it that you are practicing? So important things to look into, just some last things to look into, is what programs does the agency offer. So for my example, we don't offer individual counseling or medication management, so that's important to understand that some agencies do offer that, some don't. What health insurance companies are they in network with? That is really annoying, but it is something we have to look into. Especially like if we have Medicaid, what agencies are in network with Medicaid or Medicare. Those are really important topics to look into. Do they have a sliding scale or income-based services? So some agencies will actually offer sliding scale services based on income or based on what you can afford when you walk in. Some also offer cheaper sessions. If they have interns at the practice, they may offer cheaper sessions for you to meet with them as well. So if you even want to kind of slide your way into therapy, that could be a good place to start. How does the agency match you with the therapist? Do they match you over the phone? Do they just kind of set you up with somebody? Like, how do they match you with who you're meeting with? Do they have a free initial consultation? I don't hear about this often, but it's not a bad question to ask. Do they have a consultation where you can either talk to them for a little bit, or do you just kind of get into it from day one? Am I looking for any sort of testing such as ADHD or autism? That's actually very important. A lot of people have walked into my building asking for ADHD testing. We don't offer that, and so I have to point them out to agencies that do. And so that would be a good initial question to ask either over the phone when you're kind of first looking into that. And then, are you looking for therapy and medication management, or just kind of one or the other? Some agencies actually offer both, so it might be good to get both services through that agency. Some only offer one or the other, and so it's a good thing to ask when you are kind of on the phone with those agencies. So those are some areas I would really look into, when you are either Googling places or on the phone with them. Those are some really good questions to ask so that you're not walking into an assessment like what I do. Our assessments are about 45 minutes, so it's almost a 45-minute appointment for me to tell people, well, we don't exactly offer exactly what you're looking for. And so it's a good way to kind of avoid all of that hassle from the get-go. So that is it for my presentation. I don't know if we have time. It's about 10 o'clock, so yeah, I think I'm out of time. But thank you guys so much. Thank you so much for being here. And then